Ahead and get started with this. We have the Industrial Revolution packet, and also I've folded in the Urbanization and Immigration packet to this as well. So this is actually a double packet. It'll take us 2 weeks to do, so we'll kind of little chunk it up. That way it doesn't kill anybody. We're not taking anybody to the hospital or anything. But we're going to start off with the Industrial Revolution, and we kind of call this time period the Gilded Age. I want you to circle that word before we go for any further at the top of your notes, gilded. Let me let you know exactly what this word means, okay? If you know the term, it's awesome. Not a lot of people know that gilded literally means something that is covered in, well, what's gild sound like? Just take out the I and put no, gold. But gilded literally means it's dipped in gold. It's not entirely gold, it's just a coating of gold. So it looks nice. A lot of the times candlesticks or something like that is gilded. It looks nice, it looks expensive, but underneath it's actually just cheap metal. So we're going to start this time period off. We kind of left off from the West, settling the West, and now we're going to kind of take a little bit of a shift back and look at the Industrial Revolution of the cities. Now, the Industrial Revolution, 3 big components. Pause this, get it down. Now, by the early 1900s, the U.S. is the leading industrial nation. That word industrial, I want you to get a picture in your brain. Maybe out beside this slide, jot down some ideas of what industry looks like to you image-wise. Factories, smoke, assembly lines, yes? City lines, cityscapes, people working 16-hour a day. That's what industrialized looks like. Lots of manufacturing, mass manufacturing. But why is that possible? How is it possible the U.S. can be such an industrial nation by the early 1900s? First things first is we have an abundant supply of natural resources. Circle that natural resources. What natural resources am I talking about? I might ask you some of these on the quiz question, so make sure you write it down. I'm going to talk about oil. I'm going to talk about iron ore. I'm talking about lumber. I'm talking about a lot of just those raw resources. Not cotton anymore. I'm talking about raw resources, although cotton is definitely possible to be one of them. Second thing, improved transportation. What did we just talk about was finished? The Transcontinental Railroad in 1869. So I can move resources, people, I can sell things. That's going to be awesome. And then final, third piece of the puzzle, and here's where it really comes into it. An increase in the labor force. From 1860 to 1910, the population tripled. Circle that word, tripled, which means there's not only a greater demand for goods because there's more people, but there's more people to work in the factories, which means more production, more money, industrialization. There it is. Now, government supported industrialization. Pause this slide, get it down. It's an important one. Now, this means the government supports industrialization. Of course they do. If we industrialize, we make money, the government makes money, economic self-sufficiency, voila, Merca. Okay? Helped industries with loans and minimal regulation. I want you to circle that word regulation right there. Right there. Circle that word. What's a regulation? It's a rule. It's a law, right? Well, if there's no rules, they can do whatever they want. Oh, that sounds like, laissez-faire. Hands off, let it be. You remember that? Literally what laissez-faire means. Let it be. I want you to write that down. The government also wanted railroad construction, subsidized by the government with land grants and loans. But this laissez-faire approach means that the government steps back and it lets the economy do whatever it wants. It says no rules. As long as you are making money, we are happy as clams. And they also take and they're going to view labor unions or organizations with suspicion, because a labor organization like a union says, you better take care of our people. We want this many hours a workday. We want this much time off. And when that happens, that's good for the worker, but is it good for the business? It's not good for productivity when people get lunch breaks and all this kind of stuff like, oh my God, you have to eat. There's sarcasm in that, okay? Now, the other thing that they are going to do is they're going to put high tariffs. I need you to circle high tariffs. Remember, what is a tariff? I might ask you this on the quiz. It's a tax on what? Imports. And with that, what we do, and the government does, is if it puts a tax on imports, the French and German and English goods become more expensive. So what do I want to buy? The American good. Okay? Now, this is a little bit contradictory to laissez-faire, because laissez-faire is supposed to be hands off, let it be. But here's the deal. If the government can support American business, they want to make sure they do that. Now, on this, we're going to talk a lot about this, okay? In class, I'm going to go over a little bit of it. Okay, the next thing we're looking at is, and well, in between these slides, I have the capitalism, okay, definition, which is an economic system based on laissez-faire and competition. But the next thing we have is the steel organization. I want you to pause this, get it down. I'm going to talk about somebody who's really important. Okay, so steel affected technological change more than any other product. Circle that. Because here's the deal. Steel was made to use and build, well, anything. Machines, skyscrapers, you might want to write this out beside there, skyscrapers. It allowed for the cheaper building of materials. Because before steel, they had to have pure iron ore, and they'd have to have silver, they'd have to have something else. But when steel comes on the market, it's going to allow them to make cheaper metal that can build things and hold its strength. Now, there is one man who is going to be responsible for this. Well, technically two. Andrew Carnegie's your big one. I want you to star his name. Massive star. Highlight his name. Steel tycoon. Big time moneymaker. In fact, the richest man in the world at one point. Okay? And the other thing that I need you to make sure you star about this slide or highlight is the Bessemer process, which Andrew Carnegie met up with this gentleman named Bessemer, and they figured out a way to put cold air pressure into iron ore and transform it, mass transform it into steel. And so Andrew Carnegie could produce lots of steel. When supply goes up, price goes down. So more people can buy it, which means more people can make stuff, which means more people can industrialize. Voila, Industrial Revolution. The other thing that's important on this slide you need to know about Andrew Carnegie, he believed in something called the social gospel movement, and he financed public libraries. I need you to circle the social gospel movement. There's a lot on this slide we're going with, so you better be ready for this on a quiz. This is the belief, of course, remember Jane Addams, that you can reach salvation through service to the poor. With that, he definitely believes in that, but he also has a different idea. Want to make sure you understand that he mostly believes, and he even writes something called the Gospel of Wealth. And Carnegie is going to pen this idea that he thinks it's the wealthy's obligation to contribute to society, which is why he financed, what did I just say? Public libraries. So it's part of the social gospel movement, but I'm going to be honest with you, it's a little bit different. He's going to become known something what we call a philanthropist, okay? Next up, let's talk about another tycoon, another big-time moneymaker. Actually, two on this slide. Okay, oil and electricity. Pause it, get it down. Now, oil, I'm going to be honest with you, you probably all have heard of John D. Rockefeller, but oil can be refined into gasoline, kerosene, and distillate. Now, back then, actually, kerosene is probably going to be the more useful one. That's how you light your homes when you don't have electricity mass-produced. Gasoline, probably today. But John D. Rockefeller takes and he creates Standard Oil Company. He's like one of those rags to riches stories. He owns all aspects of production. He is going to be what we're going to call a horizontal integrated company, and he owns every single oil refinery basically there is in the world. Actually, technical number here, this would be a perfect quiz question, controlled 90% of the entire world's oil. So if you're buying oil, guess who you're buying it from? John D. Rockefeller. Now I want you to think for a second. Stop writing. Think. If you can only buy oil from one person in the world, what can that person do to the price of oil? Anything they want, right? And so oil, you can take and you raise it up, and we get what we call a monopoly, where one company owns the market and they do what they want with the price. Now, in a laissez-faire capitalist society, when there's competition going on, a lot of the times we see prices lower. It's like, what do I go to? Pack-a-Sack or Toot and Totem? Whichever one's cheaper, right? So with that, you've got oil and electricity under Rockefeller. The other person on this slide, pretty important that we know about him, and you know him, Edison Electric. There you go. But I want you to make sure, and it's not in your notes, so I'm going to add this one out below Edison. I want you to write, company is called GE. Have you all seen that probably at your home, on your dishwasher, on your refrigerator? GE. It's called General Electric. And Edison Electric is going to supply electric power to New York City, and he's going to corner that market. Now, the other ones that I want to make sure you get down, and I don't have a slide for them, but I want to make sure you get them down, so add them to the top of this page or maybe in between these. Pause this, get it down, just get down their names and what their businesses were. Commodore Vanderbilt, Cornelius Vanderbilt, he's going to be a railroad monopolist, and he's a philanthropist. And then the other one, and this one's a starred one, you might want to highlight his name, J.P. Morgan, and he is going to be a monopolist of the banks. He actually has an idea of, he doesn't buy every single company, he just puts people on, have you all ever heard of something called the board of directors? So he takes and he puts people on all the board of directors and controls the banks that way. You'll notice all of these gentlemen, whether it's, taking and J.P. Morgan controlling all the banks, Vanderbilt owning most of the railroads, Edison supplying the only power, Rockefeller with all of the oil, 90% of the oil, or of course the big one, Andrew Carnegie, who really mass produces faster than anyone steel. They're cornering the market in one area, which means they are what we call a monopoly. And monopolies take and dominate the market. A lot of the times we'll call them trusts, which is a fancy word and a nice word for monopoly, but nonetheless important to know. All right, next slide. Pause it, get it down. The assembly line. I just realized that the slides are flopped. Oops. Sorry. Maybe if you read ahead, you got that. Okay, so with that, the assembly line. Henry Ford. I don't need to talk too much about this one. You guys know the assembly line. Popularized manufacturing, combined sub-assembly lines into a continuous moving. I'm going to be honest with you. The assembly line itself, not necessarily a Ford invention, but he takes and he puts the conveyor belt, which speeds it up and makes it produce more, producing more, supply more, prices go down, good times. Divided operation into simple tasks. Here's another thing. Out beside simple tasks, I want you to write something. That means you don't have to have skilled workers. Circle unskilled workers, which means you can hire people and pay them less. So with that, immigrants are going to be a massive, massive part of the assembly line. Allows for faster production, reduced costs of the automobile, later in the 1920s, the Model T. But big word I've got here, efficiency. We're more efficient, we produce more, supply goes up, price goes down, industrialization, boom. Mass production, okay? Now, railroads. This is a very quick review. Pause it, get it down. Now, railroads, we know that there's, of course, going to be the Transcontinental Railroad. We've got these two railroad companies. We've already heard about them, Union and Central Pacific. We know we have two groups of immigrants. I have hired workers from China in your notes, okay? But I also want you to add in, what other group did we already talk about? Not China, but who came over on the East Coast? Irish. Now, when this was completed in Utah, the Pacific Railroad Act is going to be completed, and it had provided for the Transcontinental Railroad building. How does the railroad help industrialization is my big question, right? Well, it's simple. Railroads ship goods. The more goods you ship, the more you sell. The more you sell, the more you make. The more you make, the more you can industrialize. And we become that industrialized nation that Hamilton, maybe this is a good question here, that Hamilton had envisioned. Remember, Jefferson wanted an agrarian utopia. Hamilton said, let's manufacture, let's industrialize, and it's starting to become a reality. All right, this one's going to be our very last slide of the notes. Pause it, get it down. I'm going to talk quick. Now, here's the deal. I've been talking a lot about monopolies, right? A monopoly is one business that controls the entire market, so they can do what they want with their prices. But here's the deal. When there's more companies, competition happens, and it normally lowers prices. So these monopolies are going to dominate the entire economy. Now, they're either going to be vertically integrated like Carnegie's, where he owns all aspects. He manufactures or harvests the iron ore. He manufactures it into steel with the Bessemer process. He then delivers it to all the people. Every single step of the way, Carnegie owns that piece of steel or iron ore. Or it's going to be horizontally integrated like Rockefeller or Morgan, where basically every single oil company owned by Rockefeller. Every single bank owned by or controlled by J.P. Morgan. So this is when a large company owns several smaller companies. I've got some examples there. Make sure you understand this slide because this is going to be one of the tougher things, and we'll talk a little bit more about it in class. Video number 1, done. Get ready for 2.